Jackson Cole sat quietly on the wooden bench overlooking Lake Harmony. The sun dipped low, casting a golden hue across the water. At 62, he often found peace in this spot, reflecting on everything he had learned, endured, and experienced. He wasn't the wealthiest man in town, nor the most educated. But there was something he had that many lacked: wisdom. Hard-earned, brutally honest wisdom. As a young man growing up in rural Nebraska, Jackson had a simple dream: to become a pilot. He watched planes pass overhead while lying on haystacks, wondering what the world looked like from up there. But his path didn't unfold the way he imagined. His father, Thomas Cole, ran a modest repair shop, and money was always tight. Jackson began working with his father at 15, balancing wrenches while memorizing flight manuals at night. One evening, his father placed a calloused hand on Jackson's shoulder and said, "Son, life won't wait for you to be ready. Some things you learn because you must, not because you choose to." Those words echoed for decades in Jackson's memory. It wasn't until he was older that he truly understood what his father meant. At 19, Jackson faced his first real setback. He was offered a scholarship at a small aviation school in Colorado, but 2 weeks before he was supposed to leave, his father suffered a stroke. In an instant, Jackson's plans changed. He stayed home to care for the shop for his mother, and for a little sister named Katie who still had dreams of her own. It was the first time Jackson learned that sacrifice wasn't a choice, it was a requirement. Years passed. The shop became his full-time responsibility. He took pride in fixing engines, helping neighbors, and keeping the lights on. But it was during this period that Jackson encountered another lesson: self-respect is non-negotiable. A wealthy landowner named Arthur Wallace offered to buy the shop and surrounding land to build a strip mall. The offer was tempting, enough to set Jackson up for life. But he knew the land had history. His father built the business with bare hands. His mother planted roses along the fence, and his sister's name was carved into the concrete sidewalk. He turned down the offer. Friends called him foolish. But Jackson believed that standing by your values isn't something you debate. Something you do without blinking. At 28, Jackson met Erin Monroe. She walked into the shop looking for a tire change, and walked out with his heart. Erin was a schoolteacher, soft-spoken but firm in her beliefs. She challenged Jackson in ways no one ever had. On their third date, she asked, "What do you want to teach your children, Jackson?" That question changed his perspective. For years he'd lived reactively. But Erin inspired him to think about legacy, purpose, and the kind of man he wanted to be. That was when Jackson learned that love isn't just about feelings, it's about intention. Real love requires honesty, growth, and effort every day, even when it's hard. They married the next spring under an elm tree behind Erin's grandmother's house. Life became busier but richer. They had 2 sons, Dylan and Chase, and a daughter, Abigail. Jackson worked longer hours to provide, but he never missed a parent-teacher conference or Sunday breakfast. He learned that time is the real currency in relationships, not money. As his children grew, Jackson tried to instill in them what life had taught him. He often said, "Don't wait for motivation, build discipline." When Dylan wanted to quit baseball after striking out 3 games in a row, Jackson didn't coddle him. He stood at the batting cage with him for hours, helping him find his rhythm. "This isn't about baseball," he said. "This is about showing up for yourself." Dylan went on to become captain of his high school team. Chase struggled with anxiety through middle school. Jackson didn't understand it at first. Mental health wasn't something his generation talked about. But instead of brushing it off, Jackson sat down with him night after night, researching articles, speaking with counselors, and most importantly, listening. That's when he learned another crucial lesson. Understanding others requires humility, not judgment. Meanwhile, Abigail, the youngest and fiercest of the 3, decided she wanted to become a civil rights lawyer. She was passionate, fearless, and often challenged her father's beliefs. At first, their debates ended in frustration, but over time, Jackson recognized that you can lead without always being right. Sometimes leadership is about creating space for others to shine. In his late 40s, the town faced a devastating flood. Businesses were wiped out, homes were ruined, and many residents fled. But Jackson stayed. He used his savings to rebuild the shop, not for profit, but because the community needed it. He helped rebuild fences, donate supplies, and coordinate food drives. The mayor called him the pillar of harmony. But Jackson simply said, "This town raised me. It's not charity, it's duty." He had learned that being part of a community isn't optional. It's essential. His 50s brought the loss of his mother and a cancer scare of his own. Erin stood by him through it all, never wavering. During one of his chemo sessions, Jackson whispered to her, "I'm sorry you have to go through this with me." Erin kissed his forehead and replied, "We go through everything together. That's what love means." He realized that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's strength in its rawest form. By the time Jackson reached 60, he had watched his children move out, get married, and start families of their own. He missed the noise, the chaos, the late-night talks. But he also felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Not because life was perfect, but because it was honest. He had made mistakes, forgotten anniversaries, moments of anger, choices he'd do differently if he could. But he had always owned up to them. Because accountability isn't optional in life. It's a requirement. Now, sitting by the lake as a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, Jackson thought about the world his grandchildren would inherit. A world that often confused comfort with happiness, and convenience with growth. He hoped they'd learn what he had, not just from books or lectures, but from living. That real growth comes from discomfort. That failure is the best teacher if you're brave enough to face it. That character matters more than reputation. That discipline will carry you when motivation fails. That kindness isn't a weakness, but a power most people overlook. One afternoon, his grandson Noah visited him at the lake. Noah was 16, struggling with school, confused about life, and worried he wasn't good enough. He asked his grandpa, "How do you know what to do when everything feels like too much?" Jackson smiled, leaned back, and told him a story. Not about success, but about surviving the tough days. About showing up when you don't feel like it. About saying, "I'm sorry" when you mess up. About pushing through when it's easier to give up. He said, "These lessons I've learned weren't choices, Noah. They were requirements. Life didn't ask me if I wanted to learn them. Forced me to. And I'm grateful for it." Noah nodded slowly. "So I just have to keep going." Jackson chuckled. "No, son. You have to keep growing. That's the difference." As the sun began to set again, Jackson stood up. His joints a little stiff but his spirit unwavering. He knew his time was more limited now, but he also knew he had lived a life of meaning. Not because of what he had, but because of what